And because
Shut that door, it's cheers off.
yeah, I think he
Shuts
yeah he didn't run it. Because Israel, him and Israel had anger at each other.
You could have told me all this, huh?
Tom, if you want to switch over one to the left, you might be able to get you.
The team was like 13.
This paper will be no shit. Nobody wants to see this. Well, they don't want to see me.
So all over this,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
let's see if you can pull that up on your phone. How's it look?
Got one.
All right, we're live, so we're just gonna double check the quality and stuff like that, and then we can get out of y'all's way. Is everybody on the phone conference?
Brandon, you still good?
Yeah.
Okay.
You want to stick around there?
Good, we're good. Hey, Jens, thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Thanks, Jens. Yeah, you gotta get that door back up.
Thanks, Steve.
Good.
Now that we are streaming live and this meeting is being recorded, this will be the initial meeting of the Grayson County Wireless Authority, August 24th, 2023. And in the opening business, I would ask Mr. Smith if you would lead us in the pledge of allegiance. And opening with prayer.
Thank you, Father, for this day that you've given us to live and enjoy. Thank you for this wireless authority that can work toward advancing things where it should be on communication in our county. We pray that you be with them in your endeavors and the action that is taken. It's in your name we pray. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, before us we have an agenda and consent agenda. Chair would ask for a motion for the approval of the agenda, consent agenda. So moved. Okay. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Mr. Robbie? Aye. Okay. Aye. Okay, the chair also aye. And for those that may be viewing by live stream, would make the audience aware that Mr. Ivy Wilson District is attending via telephone conference. Also, would like to remind the members of the board that in a resolution recently adopted by the Board of Supervisors, that the Wireless Authority was established to oversee the planning, establishment, and financing of assets required for communication infrastructure in the county. The resolution also appointed the current members of the Board of Supervisors as the initial board members for the authority. Upon the advice of councilmen, I will be asking for a motion to ratify the current composition of the Wireless Authority Board by a motion, second, and a vote. Okay. So at this point, would I entertain a motion? So moved.
Sorry.
Okay, any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Chair also aye. Okay, now that the membership is ratified, there will need to be an election of a chairman for a one-year term effective today. And at this time, entertain motions.
Make a motion, John Fant for chair.
Okay. Do I have a second?
Guys, could y'all repeat that? I couldn't quite hear it.
Okay. We've had at this time, we're trying to appoint a chairman for this wireless authority. And before the board right now, Mr. Belton has made a motion for Mr. Fant to chair the board. Entertain a second.
I'll second.
Okay. Any discussion? Okay. All those in favor of the nomination signify by saying aye.
Abstain.
Okay. Chair also aye. Okay. At this point, I'll turn the proceedings over to Mr. Fant.
Oh, man, I get the gavel.
You get the gavel and everything.
All right, watch out. Okay, next item on the agenda is the election of a vice chair, so I'll open the floor nominations for vice chair for the wireless authority.
I'll make Mike Cash.
Okay, there's a motion that Mike Cash be the vice chair. Do I have a second?
Second.
We have a second by Supervisor Anderson. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
I abstain.
So you got 4 ayes and 1 abstention. Congratulations, sir. I'm gonna advocate, hand back up. All right, moving on. Next item is the appointment of secretary, and I think our document said over the county administrator for recommendation.
Yeah, recommendation for me would be to appoint Mr. Tom Revels as the Secretary of Authority.
So the recommendation from staff is for Tom Revels to serve as the Secretary of the Wireless Authority. Do I entertain a motion for that?
Make the motion.
So moved. We have a motion from Supervisor Ivy for Mr. Revels to be the secretary. Is there a second?
Second.
Supervisor Haas, second. Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor, say aye. 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 Okay. Congratulations, Secretary Revels. So with that, I think we move on to new business.
Correct.
And let's look here real quick. So, Tom, I'll flip it over to you
Okay.
for the new business.
Hey, I'll just kick it off.
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
go ahead.
That's okay. Hey, it's okay. Just as everybody knows, and if anybody's watching here, we have 2 major projects that we're trying to face here. We have, all related to communication. We have a 911 system that has to be addressed, and we have cellular issues that we're also trying to address at the same time. We're trying to look at both of those together and understand how we can, I would say, best utilize the assets we have and best utilize the limited dollars we have. And Tom will give us a little presentation today on some of the things we talked about.
Thank you. First, let me say, I'm not presenting this as a technical expert. This guy and this guy know more in their little fingers than I know in all 10 of mine. I looked at it from a project management perspective because after attending the Crossroads discussion and having sat through a lot of discussions about the internet project and also the idea of cellular service, it appeared to me that there was a lot of overlap, and that if we approached the projects as 2 parallel tracks, 1, it'd be more expensive, and 2, I couldn't see how we would be as successful with either one doing them separately. So let me declare that right up front. So as you look at the notes that I made, if you think about the wireless authority and why it was established, and you think about our comprehensive plan, the county's comprehensive plan clearly recognizes that our county is in the dark from a communication perspective in a lot of ways. Paul could sit here for 3 or 4 hours and talk to you and give you case studies of events that have happened where our law enforcement, our EMS, our fire folks have not been able to communicate, have not been able to coordinate things that occur. Clearly, cellular phone service doesn't exist in probably more than half of this county. And in the other half, except for a few exceptions, it's pretty spotty. And it goes and comes as you travel around the roads. And that's important because even with the digital upgrades that are being talked about down the road for 911, cellular service as an adjunct for paging is really important. Because think about it, our volunteers are not sitting in buildings all day long. Many of them are out in Christmas tree fields and are out and about. And so cellular service is really important. And then if you think about subscribers, we got a lot of people who don't have landlines. So if they need emergency service and there is no cell coverage or it's down, they don't have the ability to connect. And then last but not least, we've all heard more about fiber over the past several years than we probably want to know about. But the fiber project is very important because frankly, without it, you can't feed the cell service capabilities, and frankly, you can't feed microwave that's needed for our long-term radio transmissions. So thank you, AEP. Kenneth, you're retired, but still, as an AEP former leader, that's really important. And while the project has been less than stellar on connectivity, we can't overlook the fact that we've got 243 miles of high-speed fiber. And we're now over 400 customers connected. The only problem those customers are having is many of them having to replace their routers because they got $39.99 routers and it won't handle the speeds that are being pushed through them. Case in point, White Top Library. They love the service, but it's blowing their routers up. So Mary Thomas is now having to look at how do they buy the new equipment to upgrade the routers to handle the speeds that are being pushed through the new fiber connections. By October 1st, there will be technical capability to serve over 2,900 customers in our county. Now, I say technical capability because there are issues with right-of-ways. I'm pleased to say that it looks like Gigabeam and AEP have finally kind of got on the same team, and they're beginning to coordinate and work on that, which I think is a real positive. And we still have people who are outside of the buffer zone that can be served. And so I think as we think about where we go after the current project ends, we need to realize that we still have 50% of the people in the county who will not be impacted by the current project. Project management. The biggest issue that I see that is a stumbling block for any and all of our technology infrastructure development is lack of vertical assets. You all know there are none in the, to speak of significance in the western end of the county, but even the vertical assets we have in the eastern side of the county are not foolproof either. There are 2 cell towers that probably are the best in terms of access for vertical rise for whatever project we want to do, whether it's expansion of cell, whether it's expansion of wireless, internet, or for that matter, 911 communications. So to me, as I looked at the projects, the first thing was what could be done over the next 3 to 4 to 5 months to try to improve communications. And it's clear when you study the information and the proposals that repeaters that we're now using, which takes a 2-watt radio and channels it up so it can go further and louder and with more power, are kind of on the last piece. So one of the things that I drew out of the proposals that have been done was maybe short term, we ought to look at mobile repeaters, which a lot of the EMS people in our surrounding areas have, that will allow our people out in the field to take a 2-watt radio and turn it into a 25-watt source of communication. We also, Paul, kind of hammered in my head, let's don't do anything that we can't use long-term. Well, clearly repeaters are a long-term aspect of a project. The second part of that was radios. And again, I'm not an expert, but I can tell you that in my part of the world of Rugby and White Top, they got some of the oldest daggone radios I've ever seen, and many of them aren't the same manufacturer. They're not programmed the same, and we wonder why they can't communicate at times. Probably some of that could be lack of compatibility. So as from a project management, stabilization, probably around $375,000 or less. Because Paul knows that there's grant money. That figure doesn't include grant money, Paul. So every grant dollar we get, that number can ratchet down and be available for other things. But that's something we could start on immediately. And I think it would have an impact. It is not the final solution for 911. Make that clear. It is not a final solution that we can sit here a year and a half and think, boy, look what we did. So when you look at the next phase of a plan, it would be, how do we get vertical assets? And who builds them? How do we pay for them? Well, there's a reason there are no vertical assets in the west part of this county. There is no company that operates for profit that can have a business plan that makes money by investing $2 to $3 million in vertical towers and then tries to pay for that off the backs of less than 1,000 people. Just ain't gonna happen. Doesn't happen anywhere. So at the end of the day, in my opinion, as we look at the project, the county has, if we want to improve the ability to deliver technology in the western half of our county, the county's going to put some money in the game, because no for-profit company is going to step in and address that significant issue. And think about it, guys, when we started this whole project, it was all going to be wireless 5 years ago until AEP came to the table. Not one national vendor approached us to respond to our RFP. Not one. Wouldn't give us time of day. Now, since we do have fiber, there's some interest. And so we do have a couple of national vendors, US Cellular being one, T-Mobile being another, that have expressed interest in trying to explore how to service the county, not only the western end, but other pockets of activity in our county. The importance of that is, for 911, the final product, no question about it, is microwaves and tying towers together so that you get solid communication links wherever you are in the county. Without the vertical assets, you're handicapped. You wouldn't buy a Ferrari to drive the graveled road bike trail through Grayson County. Why would we invest $2 million in great technology and hang it on towers that are either condemned, overloaded, or non-existent? That's basically our dilemma. So when you look at the project, you're looking at about $2.9 million of an investment in vertical assets. That's both new towers and refurbishing current towers. And you're looking at about $2.5 million for the microwave, radio, and all of the transmission things that are needed for 911 emergency services. Now, if we have vertical towers, the cell service operating costs would be covered by a vendor, because they could lease space on our towers. So that's why there's no cell service component built into my numbers. Now, I owned a company, I ran a company, I had to always fight the challenge of how to pay for what I wanted to do. And so on one hand, we're looking at about $5.4 million of an investment So where do we get that money? Currently, we're sitting on about $1 million in ARPA funds. We have $475,000 in tobacco commission grants. We are sitting on $544,000 and a few dollars on tax levy money. And in my opinion, we should at least explore borrowing tax exempt money for 20 years to help pay for the project. Finance 101 in any company is don't invest in long-term assets with short-term cash. And the best example I can give you of that is, how many of you paid cash for your house that you live in? I'd love to think I could do that. But we recognize that we need a house. We look at it as something we're not going to throw away in a year. And so we borrow money over long term to help pay for that. Well, I remind all of us that, and I happen to be sitting on that side of the room at this point, that when the last tax levy was increased, we committed as a board to a penny going into a fund every year, a penny of evaluation of a levy to broadband and communication infrastructure. And today that's valued at about $188,000 a year. And so when you look at the $544,000, that's actually 3 years of tax levy money that's been squirreled away and put in the side to help pay for broadband. So when you look at what we have available, which is a little over $2 million, we would still fall short by about $3.5 million. My suggestion for discussion would be that we talk to people who are financial experts who work with counties and cities all over the state and evaluate what could we borrow long-term using the money from the tax levy that we committed to our citizens that we would spend for broadband. I don't know what that number is exactly, but there are people who could help us get there. So from a project perspective, there are 4 things I would like to throw out on the table, Stephen, before we get into technical discussions as an ask on behalf of management. I think we should work with one of the 2 that have been recommended by VACO, either Davenport or PFM. Those are the 2 financial advisor groups in the state who work with 95% of the counties and the cities in Virginia to evaluate ability to finance and the proper way to do it. I mean, for example, guys, there are 2 ways to borrow money by counties in the state of Virginia. One's called an obligation bond. An obligation bond says that if you default, whoever holds that can force you to raise taxes to pay for it. You have no option. You got to do it. You got to pay for it. There's something called a moral obligation, which is where you can borrow money for certain kind of projects that are essential, like life safety, law enforcement, etc., where the county cannot be forced to repay. But again, it's kind of sleight of hand because the bondholder can take over your asset and sell it if they want to. Well, if you have towers with 911 equipment all over it, that becomes something that the county's not going to sit back and let somebody take it down, sell it off piece by piece. So, but a financial advisor could help guide us in figuring out not only what you can borrow, but how to do it the most appropriate way and to get the money you need long term. So that would be one thing. I don't have the expertise, although I have to tell you, I used to run hospitals and we borrowed hundreds of millions of dollars for tax exempt bonds, but I wasn't the financial wizard that created the model. I employed people. The second thing would be to approve spending some of the tax levy money that's in the bank, or either ARPA, whichever, because it's sitting there, to help do temporary stabilization so that we can begin to make progress on improving things, even though we realize it's not a long-term total solution. Third would be to direct management to negotiate a service proposal with one or more sale companies for the construction of towers to bring back to the wireless authority for consideration. Because as we all know, you can talk about doing things, but until you put it in writing and get a draft, you never know really what you got. So we need to take action to begin that process, in my opinion. Last but not least, I think we need to look at the cellular side and the 911 side and really drill down into the cost so that when we, again, if we decide to borrow money, you have to have a very specific, detailed plan showing not only the upfront acquisition cost, but the ongoing maintenance cost of whatever it is you're buying. Because a bondholder doesn't want to put their money into something that you're going to let sit idly and fall apart and not take care of over 20 years. And so we've got a lot of that in place, but we need to take one more crack at it and look at it both from the cellular side, tower maintenance, as well as the microwave radio distribution system side. So, gentlemen, that's my 2 cents worth from a project management perspective. Is there any question in my mind that our 911 system is terrible? No, it isn't. We had a helicopter trying to land in White Top to pick up somebody the other day, and they couldn't communicate with the helicopter, and it came real close to the life flight group aborting and heading out. We could go on and on, and Paul, you've got a list 4 miles long, I'm sure, where every day we can't provide the level of 911 support that may be needed. And last but not least, cell service. We got a lot of people who can't communicate, even if they are having a heart attack, they can't call because they don't have landlines. And most people rely on cell service today, and we don't have that here. And of course, we have to remember the 200,000 people that traipse through our county every year for the Creeper Trail and Grayson Highlands, who are totally struck by my phone doesn't work. How do I find where I'm going? And that in itself creates 911, life support, law enforcement, et cetera, problems for the community. So to me, it's not an issue of is there a problem? We got a huge problem. The question is, how do we get started and make something happen and do it in an expedient manner?
Sure. Shouldn't we have a finance director in here with this?
Okay, we get it.
I mean, because we're talking about budget, and
Yep.
levy, and I think it would be good to have her in here in case.
Is there a question you have that I can answer?
Well, you might get. Well, my thing is, so we've donated 1 cent, and of course you remember that to that equals, what did you say?
Right, this past year it was 188,000 and a few dollars.
Each year's a little bit different.
Yeah, this year it's looking like it's going to be about 189,000.
Okay.
So just
That's
a
what
slight
we got,
difference.
that's what we got from Larry.
Right, but it wasn't so much that I had a question.
Yeah.
It was, it would be good if she's hearing what we're hearing when we go to talking about spending or, what we've got to do. That was my thought. I mean, if you don't agree with that.
Supervisor, I've spent about 3 hours with her in the last day and a half going through these numbers.
Right.
All these numbers came from Larry and from her, not me. I just knew who to ask.
All right,
So,
I don't mind getting her in here, but,
yeah.
we kind of went through them just to make sure we had them right, because I wasn't sure we had them right. And, she's had to do some research on some of this stuff to make sure that they're right. So I didn't want to we didn't want to openly talk about them unless we were pretty close to their accurate. But I'll get her if you want.
No, I'm good with that. I didn't know you guys had talked with her, but I just thought it would be, if she's hearing what we're hearing, then we don't have to backtrack.
and the other thing I would say is if you guys agree that we need to have somebody come in here and give us some advice on whether or not we should borrow or whatever, she's gonna be the point person.
Yeah, before, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, she'd be the point person for that whole discussion.
Because if I understood your recommendation, it would, so we've got some money set aside, just the 500 some thousand.
Right.
If we use some of that to stabilize things and moving forward, maybe that part of the levy is used as the payment toward the bond.
Right,
If
that's correct. That's correct.
I think you'll have a bunch of questions, but you're talking about whether to use the tax levy or ARPA. We certainly have to think about the timelines on the ARPA funds that we have left over. 24, we're supposed to obligate, 26 execute, so we're gonna have to keep that in mind as well. But those are,
Wasn't this part of one of the things we discussed in budget to do with ARPA was communications, didn't we?
yeah.
Did we set a number to that or percent of the ARPA?
Not that I'm aware of. Are you?
Well, when we,
For the ARPA funds?
for ARPA funds, when we were going through what we thought was committed, not necessarily, officially, spent, but we committed, I think, at the time, about 1.2 million. 1 million of that was communication infrastructure, and
Say that
200.
one more time.
1 million of it was communication infrastructure, which is the second item, I think, on Tom's slide. And then the other 200K, I think, was childcare, is what my memory is.
And Mr. Chairman, that's what she has in her system.
Right.
Because when I went to her, she went to the system and started pulling it all out and gave me a printout. She picked that up from a former session.
Supervisor Anderson, if there's a question, this transition from a finance director has been a little bit challenging. And so if there's a question that we can't answer, we may have to do some research on it and come back to you to track down something that may have gotten missed in a transition. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Make sure I get your questions answered. I want to make sure I get your questions answered.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. Now, my initial premise for her being in here was just so she would know, but it sounds like she knew because he.
These are her numbers.
Right, so that was the whole point of that.
Hey, Mr. Ivy, you might want to mute your phone there if you could on your end. For the purpose of proceeding, you want to take these 4 items?
I think we take them one by one.
One by
Yeah, I think we
one.
take them one by one, and we may have some discussion
Right.
on each one of those.
So the secretary program manager has asked, got 4 asks here. So the first one is authorize management to enter into a contract. Well, if it's the pleasure of the board, we'll look at each one of those as a motion, so we can address it, and then we'll have the discussion. Is that fair? Or do you wanna, we can just throw it up there, have a discussion about it, and then move into the motion? Is that?
I think I would take a motion and second on each one, just so we're.
Right. So,
The path that we proceed forward on the 911 portion of it, is that gonna be a factor in the numbers?
Yeah, sure will.
So that would have to be we're needing to, I know the other localities are trying to nail down from our joint meeting that we had a path forward, so they can either cut bait with this other vendor that we've looked at, or take our own path, which kind of, I think Carroll County has decided to do.
Yeah, Carol, I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you.
No, but
Trying to think who all was at that meeting. Was everybody at that meeting last time?
No, I wasn't there.
Okay, I can't remember.
and
Brandon
Bradley was not there.
Okay. So Carroll County's made the decision to stabilize what the equipment they have. They have an RF out right now that we certainly can attach on to. It's can utilize that RFP if we need to, but it's still the board's decision as to whether we want to take a stabilization route or to still view the contract as presented.
But
I would say.
that discussion is really alongside of 2, right? For the first item has to do with just authorization for you to talk to a financial advisor about long-term debt. Is
So
that,
if I may, Mr. Vice Chair, if you do the math, the 2.5 plus the 3.75 comes out to about what the total cost of the project was projected to be at Crossroads. So to the extent that we save any money, we either purchasing or whatever we do, I built in enough in this so that literally we got flexibility. So I'm not trying to presuppose that we're gonna save $500,000 over what was presented, because I don't know that. But I think that's a discussion of detail that these guys and this guy, we need to kind of circle the wagons and make sure we got it solid to bring back to you.
so for item one, why don't we kind of maybe do this a little bit reverse order? Let's have a discussion about item one. If there's any questions about that one, and then we'll move to a motion and a vote or any further discussion. Is that okay with y'all? So for item number one, specific to the management talking to a financial advisor, floor is open for discussion.
So the ask is to to allow administration to talk to a financial advisor about these potential bonds.
Right. Yes.
And you've got two recommendations from the VACO for those.
There's two players out there that have been, I'm sorry.
No,
There's two players that are out there that have been used by, with Smith, Carroll, and Gay License. That's really the two we can.
The only counties that don't use Davenport or PFM are Northern Virginia, and they use one of the big three accounting financial advisor firms and pay millions of dollars to have theirs done. I mean, everybody else is using one of these two.
So my second question, that leads into my second question, Mr. Chair, is so if we enter into a contract, it's not gonna be with two of these people, you're gonna pick one. And what's our obligation? We're gonna pay them a certain fee or?
We pay them a fee, and then they can come in and make a presentation to the board as to what the options are from, they will give us a litany of options of things we can do to potentially borrow money and what the cost would be. They're also going to take a hard look at our, correct me if I'm wrong on this one, they're going to go through a lot of our finances, look at our debt ratio, look at our reserves, and say, here's what we think we can pay.
Are they tied to the bond? In other words, my mind's going a little bit blank, but I
Are they
remember.
selling the bond?
Right. Yeah, because I remember being in a VACO meeting and one of the bond representatives did a presentation, and which they might, like if they sell the bond, they might provide the advice for free. I'm trying to think it through. I don't know if it's the same thing, if I'm thinking about the same thing.
Good.
I've had a conversation to find out what's the ballpark range of fees, and it's interesting, we both of them said about 25 grand.
Yeah.
Now, if you move forward to finance long-term, that fee can be rolled in as an expense and covered by the long-term financing, so you can get paid back. If we decide not to finance, then the county's obligated for roughly $25,000. And I have a feeling if we got official proposals from them, you could probably put them side by side, and you'd think the same guy probably wrote them both. I mean, you can go down every Southwest Virginia county, and Davenport, for example, has Washington. PFM has Smith. It's kind of like this, but they're the two that VACO works with, recommends, and frankly are more price competitive than going outside the state. So it's, at most, it would be 25 grand. But like I said, if you move forward to financing, that can be part of the expense if you're financing long term. So the county would get paid back, if you will, for doing that.
That answers it.
Other questions on number one? Yeah. Okay. Hey, Brantley, any questions on item number one of the ask that you have?
No. Well, yeah. I do. $25,000 is a lot of money for somebody to come in and talk to us about how we need to finance this. But I do believe that none of the five of us can figure out the best way to do it, so we do need some help. I'm curious, could we throw another option out there? The reason we formed this wireless authority was to have access to more funding. And if we throw another option out there, if we leverage this to go after grants through the state, according to Senator Warner yesterday, there's about $2.1 billion sitting in Richmond for broadband. And if we frame this project up for broadband, and we're able to solve all three legs by going after free money, does that make more sense? I'm not opposed to finance. We have to do this. These are three critical areas in our county that we have to address. But I'd like for one of the options to be that we're going after the federal dollars that have been put into the state. I'll go back on mute.
My response to that, Supervisor Ivy, is today we could borrow long-term money for 3.5%. When you borrow it, they give it all to you up front and you put it in an escrow account. And today, if we had $3.5 million, we would put in an escrow account and make 5.6% interest. So there's positive arbitrage.
I'm not opposed to borrowing money.
Yeah, no, I know.
I didn't want to come off that way, but there's one thing that we haven't talked about is grant funding. And, we're talking about putting $4 to $5 in the west end of the county, and that's not in our body area. And I know we're limited to what we can go to the state for in the body area, but west end is not. And just given that there is a pile of money out there, I think we need to put a strategy together to go after that money. Let's take a trip to Richmond and see what we need to do to qualify for that. I'm not opposed to borrowing the money. We have to fix this issue.
Well,
I'm just suggesting that we also need to go down the grant avenue.
Tom.
yeah, that's a
Tom, so I think the point what I'm hearing him saying is that if we're able to leverage that grant money, that opens up other opportunities on the communication infrastructure side that we could then use the long-term debt to finance. So it actually potentially almost doubles our financial power if we're able to access the grant funds and then still leverage the long-term debt. Yeah. Is that fair, Brandon?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't see you guys, but I think that has to be option 4, is we have to figure out a way. I mean, Supervisor Plan, I think you heard loud and clear yesterday, so did Mr. Boyer, that there's $2.1 billion sitting in Richmond, and Scott County and whatever the other county was, Lee County, I think, got $45 million to solve this issue, and their terrain is no more harsh than ours is, or less harsh, and that's, that to me, the reason we formed this wireless authority is to have the ability to go after things that just the county administration can't. And I haven't heard that, and I know it's part of the plan, so I'm not complaining, but I guess my take on it is, I'm not opposed to borrow money, because we have to fix the problem, but we also need to go after this free money. And I'm on mute.
So if you looked at number 1, then is maybe instead of entering a contract, it's really authorize management to develop financial options for financing the communication infrastructure, which would give you the authority to talk to the municipal folks, but also we go after talk to the body people or whoever. I think body, DHCD, does that complicate it too much for you?
Well, I think for me, I guess, I don't know how long it will, I don't think I disagree with anything that's being said at this point. What I don't know is how long will it take us to How long will it take us to figure out how to get after this? The money that's been allocated to Richmond, and what will it cover? I guess that's what I don't know. So this may delay us for a period of time that I'm not clear. I don't have an answer for.
I don't see it as a delay, because all we're asking in number one is for developing options. I think in item number two, we're talking about actually allocating and appropriating funds we have right now to do short-term stabilization. So this is a beyond the stabilization funding discussion, which I think we have time.
Technically, if you said today, borrow money, you wouldn't have money before February, March of 24. Because the fund, the way you borrow, there's only certain times of the year that the state will back your borrowing. It's twice a year, and the next time is February. We missed the one in August. So we got time to do this, and for example, Paul was, yesterday, we're talking about grant funding for radios. If we can get half the radios covered by grant money, it just reduces the obligation of the 375. And we certainly wouldn't just spend it to be spending. We're going to go after every dollar we can find somewhere. So yeah, I don't see it being one or the other. I see it being a complementary process.
Do you need any language? I think that's, if I heard what Brandon was saying, that we want to make sure all the options, this board's direction to the staff is that we got to look at all financial options. Right now, the ask is, and number one, is that we're talking purely about municipal bonds. And that's, I think, what he's saying. And again, Brantley, not putting words in your mouth, does that?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I mean, the point is, we've got a $6.5 million problem, and we've got $1.2 million to work with, and we're not going to be able to get there. Our immediate needs, I'm in support of fixing immediately with the ARPA money that we set aside and we labeled communications. But if we frame this entire project up around broadband, and that's the money that's available, we may have to borrow some money to put some towers up, or to help US Cellular or T-Mobile or whoever it is get the west end of the county to start maybe. But if that money is sitting in Richmond and they're wanting it's earmarked to go for broadband, we have to put a strategy together to go after it. I'm not saying let's let that be the silver bullet. The only way we're going to do this is with grant money. But we don't have enough money that we have set aside to fix our problem. So the money that we do have, I'm in support of making an immediate fix with. We also just need to put the grant as part of it. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. In the study that we're talking about doing, John, you got to do if you do borrow, because the bond agency is going to require it. I mean, you and I couldn't convince a bond agency to lend us a dime. They're going to look to these guys to say they're financially worthy to loan money to. So it's a process of keeping the project moving. But I agree, we want to go after every grant dollar we get our hands
I guess, go ahead.
I just got a question. One, did that county already get this money, Brantley, or they just put in for it?
They appropriated it the other
And why haven't we done this? Why haven't we already?
I think we're encumbered by the fact that we already have a DHCD grant, the body grant, and it's still open.
And that was my next question. If we go this bond direction, does that knock us out of a grant?
Well, the body grant matures on 1 October, 30 September, something like that, right?
October 1st.
Yeah, so I think the next round of the infrastructure money that DHCD is the agent for the state that's going to handle it, I think we're back in the hunt. So to Brantley's point, the strategy about how we're, going after the three legs of the stool of communication infrastructures. The stool is really important because we do need, we've got a big number that we gotta figure out, and we don't have enough current assets to be able to do it. And so how are we doing it? And that's, I think, is the ultimate point. So that when the window does open for the next round, we're ready to submit. But that, I think, is the issue right now, is that we have a current grant open. Is that
Fair? This is Brantley. Kenny asked a really good question. Excuse me, Supervisor Bell. Asked a really good question. If we go ahead and take out the plan, maybe this is where we need that advisor. If we go ahead and take out a loan to solve our problem, would that hurt us going after body money? And second part of that is because we're going to start in the west end of the county, and it's not a body area, does it affect us?
Well, the 911, the stuff on the stabilization is not affected because that's not part of the body. The body was specifically to fiber and fixed base wireless and specific to broadband. The communication infrastructure need, though, and our goals of the communication infrastructure effort is threefold. And so I think we have an opportunity. We all know that we ain't got enough money to solve the broadband problem as it's currently progressing. And so we need more money. And so I think leveraging this 911 need, the broadband need, and the cellular need is maybe a way that'll make the next grant application really effective. I don't know the answer on, but that's, I think, your point. I don't know the answer about the municipal bonds and how that might affect our ability to get after grants. But that may be the reason why we need the ultimate reason why we need the financial advisor.
Another question, Mr. Chair.
Yeah. Or the minute, Mike, you got anything?
Yeah, good.
Just building spawned another question in my head here. So how do we position ourselves to get this money that's in Richmond that we've just recently learned about?
Yeah.
How do we position ourselves?
Yeah.
Because like Supervisor Ivy said, that the body money's not being used on that in the county. Would they not be eligible, or do you know, Mr. Chair, using that?
Well, you go ahead, Steve.
Well, you're getting into a territory that I'm just not. I don't know if will Vadi relook at it once we finish this project. Will they go, okay, here's the area that's unserved at this point in time, and then we can get funds towards specifically that area? And that's how I'm imagining it's going to go.
Once it's spin up, that's kind of what I.
Body, according to Sandy Terry, Body has never given a county grant money 2 cycles in a row. Never. Because they realize that the money they put in here, think about it, guys, only 400 people we connected. And one of the things they tell you is we're not giving any money on top of another grant to further the grant we just gave you. You gotta let that one play out. So could they do it? I guess. I don't know of any regulations that legally would prevent them, but their track record says we're gonna sit here for a year before they'll really entertain another grant from this county.
A year.
Yeah, because it's a grant cycle. They don't give them out all during the year. It's a certain cycle.
Yeah, but is the cycle, so our cycle, we were awarded that grant in 2019.
But
So-
the grant terminates October 1st of 23. That's the
Correct,
end
but
of the
that
cycle.
is the cycle, the yearly cycle, so they wouldn't give us another grant in 2020 because we got one in 2019, but we're talking 2024. And so from a cycle standpoint, it may be a terminology thing that we need to make sure we're straight on.
I guess I'm sitting here because I think the financial advisors could help us figure this out. Because I'm telling you, we can think that Vadi will let us combine cell towers and wireless and 911. My experience working with that group, it ain't gonna happen. They are very finite as to what they are putting money into. Now,
Can we get a meeting set up at DHCD in the next 2 to 3 weeks where the 3 of us from this group go up and meet with bodies and ask them what our possibilities are, because there's a lot that has transpired. One, they only gave us $2 million. Now they're giving out $45 million. We were a test project. These are the ones who found all the failures. But that's why I was saying earlier, Tom, if we frame this up as a broadband project, it just has to use USA where we're going to get 911 as part of it. To me, that's a pretty good package. And we're all sitting around here, you know, we don't know for sure. But if we could get a meeting with somebody, and I know the leadership here is changing that, but if we could get a meeting in Richmond, ask some of these questions, I would certainly be willing to go. We think that's a possibility.
I don't know, we can
Certainly
reach
try.
out in the morning and ask them. The only reservation I have is it's hedge your bet. We got serious communication issues right now. And even if we get grant money, it often comes with some pretty big strings. The current grant is not letting us totally implement the way we probably would have because of regulations. In my opinion, 25 grand is not small change. It is not. But if we're going to try to advance this issue, if we delay, because an application for funding has to be in by the 21st. If we delay, we may find that we can't meet that next cycle, and we're sitting here in August, not just for the grant, but for tax exempt funding. Next August, before we can get the money to initiate the project.
I don't
I'm
think
just-
anybody's talking about delay. I
Okay.
think it's really, to use Brantley's word, the strategy about how are we going to finance the longer term need. We've got a short term ask in number 2, but the longer term ask is the engagement with financial advisors, talking to DHCD, trying to figure out a financial path forward
Right.
for all our communication infrastructure needs. That's, I think, is what the real ask is. And so what direction do you need from the board for you to do that as a nested effort instead of just talking about maybe municipal bonds, which was kind of the direction we had when we came in.
So what I heard was the engagement with financial advisors and part of that. But what I think I'm hearing is the board wants to hold on that for now until we understand more about the options for state money.
John Fan is not, that's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
That's John Fan individual. I'm saying we do both. We need, but the strategy needs to be, we're going to talk financial, we're going to do that. Because we need to understand that no matter what. All right. But what we heard yesterday, to Brantley's point, is that there is other money out there. And so, because we maybe end up finding out that this municipal bond deal is such a good thing that we, at some point, Will Moore in that game is going to say, we're going to need a new school, just for example. We need to understand the tools in that toolbox
100%.
going forward. And so I think, number one, what we're really asking, based on discussion, is that we need to make sure that we're pursuing both all the financial options that are out there so that we can access the funds we need to solve the problem across the board. That's I think.
I'm hearing you lean Charlie.
All right.
After the discussion with Senator Warren last night, I think we talked and I said, hey, we've got to get this in line so we can take advantage of this opportunity, because he was clear, you heard him just like I did, that if we mess out on this opportunity, it's not coming again. So we have to be able to take advantage of the opportunity to get this right. So I hear you on that. I guess just need to understand if you want all that information first. Some of the questions were good. I think one of the questions I just don't know is if we try to move forward, but we're not at that decision-making point of whether we move forward with bonds. It's just, do you want to explore these options?
John Fannin, I want you to explore the option. I just want to
I thought I heard
make sure
something
we're clear. Well, it may have been, but I don't want to delay, because that's not.
Yeah, I think it was if we,
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no,
I'll
I mean, why do we have to, we can go for the check on this, that's for broadband. But I mean, why necessarily do we have to tie our 911 to broadband? I mean, fund. I mean, we're going to seek financing.
Because you don't have the towers to hang all your,
But
your 911.
who says those are? I mean, who says those are broadband towers or whatever? I mean, they could eventually end up being some kind of tie like that.
You don't have the money to do. If you said today, I want towers and 911, forget broadband and cellular, you're gonna have to borrow money or get grants to do it because you don't have enough
The
money.
most expensive thing is gonna be the towers, the fences, the generators, the land. That's gonna be, I think, I'm thinking that's.
It's about
That's gonna be the
$2
heaviest.
But I mean,
No, I hear you.
if the broadband project just happens to come along and there's funding for it, I mean, we're not. I'm saying we don't have to go out front and say that that's what we use the money for.
Right.
Use it.
I guess where I was, this effort in my mind has always been an integrated approach.
Right.
So that we're not in building.
It probably is the integrated approach, but
But the money, and where the source of the money comes from, kind of muddies that up a little bit.
Potentially, I don't know. That's why I think the discussion with DHCD on what are the left and right limits, for example, we've got, X number of dollars in the slide there for the tobacco commission. We have a lot more flexibility with tobacco money to work on the same issue than we do with the DHCD fund. And so there are some limitations, I'm sure, the DHCD, but Warner spoke yesterday about broadband specifically. There's a lot more money in that infrastructure bill and that Virginia got a chunk of than just broadband funding. I think Virginia got 1.476 billion just for broadband.
Yeah.
But there's other money that's been allocated, and so that's where I think we've got to have the discussion. But I don't want to delay on the exploration and understanding of what our tools are and to make sure that we're in line with the timelines. At the same time, we can have that discussion with DHCD and the other people in Richmond about other options to help us. Because I think the bill ultimately is going to be bigger than that because, this act right here is about 911 specifically. But we know that we want to get, fiber, we want to future-proof the county. That was the ultimate goal of the project to begin with. And that's going to need more money and it ain't necessarily 911 related. So. Anything else, Jim?
So, the money that you guys are referring to that Senator Warner was discussing, that was broadband money. That wasn't anything to do with 911 specifically.
He used the word broadband.
And I guess my other question, and you guys may not have the answer to this, but I wasn't there, you would. So Scott and Lee's already been allocated some money. How did they get ahead of the game? I mean, why do we just now learn about this? Is that?
It's not that, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
It's not that we didn't know about it. It's just like, the land in Montgomery County got $63 million last year, I think. But that wasn't out of the infrastructure bill. That was out of the governor's broadband project money. And so there's some state funds and there's some federal funds. This money yesterday, which I'm not really clear on, but Warner said it, was the first tranche on the infrastructure money that the federal government approved 2 years ago. And so there's different pots of money that are being thrown around, big numbers, but that's, again, we didn't miss out. We weren't eligible, because we had an open grant through DHCD.
Yeah, that's the only thing I can understand. That's what I understand at this point. We couldn't attack those monies because we had already been approved.
The Carroll County's put in a grant. They put in for money and they've got zero for
That's true,
3
too.
years in a row.
Yeah. And
So-
Mr. Chairman,
that's true, too.
if we revise that number one to indicate that it's not a unilateral, let's just figure out how to borrow money, we need that financial advice.
Correct.
I think to even pursue the grant side so that we know where the pieces hit. If we
Agreed.
if we revise number one to say, give us authority to get a financial advisor, but it's only part of the process of exploring all sources of funding that we need to have. Because we all know the project will probably end up being bigger long-term than we think today.
Right.
It's not a one shot and everything's great. That's what I would ask is, can we do that?
The ultimate goal for all of us is to borrow zero. We don't want to borrow money. It'd be much better if we got federal dollars or state dollars to fund this project, if we can accomplish that.
Are you comfortable with what he just said as far as the direction, give you what you think you need so that we're not hamstringing?
For your motion,
Yeah.
motion based on.
We're motion on number one, is that what we're talking
Right,
about?
that's all we're talking about.
And keep the language and presented.
The language that Tom just talked about.
We'll broaden the language to indicate that it's not unilateral, just explore borrowing the money. We will also investigate grant funding, do everything we can to get every dollar of free money we can get our hands on. Because at the end of the day, a year from now, when we're taking money down, if we decide we don't need $3 million, we need $2 million because we got $1 million grant, we don't have to take down $1 million. So, I mean, and we're gonna be lucky, we could say, you don't need your money at all. We spent 25 grand, but hey, we just don't need money.
So we have a motion on the floor. Are you comfortable with the language you said? Yes. All right. Do we have a second? We have a second from Supervisor Anderson. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Any opposed?
And we will reach out in the morning to try to get a meeting with DHCD.
And I'm also on.
Thanks, Tom.
Okay.
Just for DHCD, is there, you want this in the next couple of weeks is what I heard from Brantley. Is there a day where that works the best for the board to maximize board's availability for this?
I think he was talking about road trip to Richmond.
I
To go up
I understood
there.
that. You said 2 to 3, and so that's why I'm asking about.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be going in October. I don't know if that's too far out. To Richmond
Win on Friday.
So I have,
I'm just pretty good at coordinating schedules.
Yeah.
I will tell you, DHCD right now is going through a federal audit. And it's all hands on deck. So it may end up being a Zoom meeting that to get their time to commit to us. So we'll get as quick as we can.
we'll coordinate with the board, just to make sure we get maximum.
What would it benefit us to pull in a senator or delegate on that? Maybe.
I don't know.
I know it's transition time for them because of redistricting. But something we're thinking about. They may know an angle or something that we're not aware of.
All right, we'll move on to number 2. Does anybody need a break other than me? Yeah. All right, we'll take 5.
For those online, taking 5 minutes.
You got any notes, Mitch?
I'll have to give you
One shit. I got
Cut one down.
I agree. Keep it all because I mean, we missed water water.
Yes.
Can't have that. Grant's smart. Grant's awesome. They're limiting.
Well, they're limiting, and even though 2.1 billion is only one level.
We talk about the grants that are available for this, so it's limiting grants. It's high match. May of next year won't even apply, but.
Yeah, and see, I would, I'll figure out that, and I'm just doing this as an example. Try to get some more grants. I'd rather get the 80 and get started. We'll sit here till May.
We need to do the
Rain though, I have to put it out, which
Well, rescue squads, see if we're gonna call it 3 years, you gotta raise it.
No.
They need to be seat positions at least.
I'm 100% with you. And believe it or not, I'm talking to one of the in my house.
That's it.
They said the same thing. They said, look, Harry, John, Dick, Tom, Dick, and Harry don't need no radio.
You base them on seat positions, and then you have, a few
Absolutely.
in addition for your operators and.
I agree with you completely.
Steve?
Clarify. I mean, it's just like Paul. I mean,
Integrated with this conversation, we were having, talking about if they did the loan,
it won't be available in the summer.
look at the water projects as part of that too.
Fair enough.
I realize it's not part of this discussion.
No, that's.
It might have an impact on the.
That's a good idea. Thank you.
It's like casino money anymore.
I was gonna say, the
work world these days.
I'm sure they could. What'd you say?
Well, where's the question? I had a discussion with
I'm sure
Lisa.
the volume's gone down.
Some other counties budgeted more. I said, let's do
When I switched to
so.
a different job, I'm working
And I
on
said,
it
let's say,
now.
Did you? When did you do
I
that?
said, let's say five.
Dude,
So you might have told me that. I thought I remember something.
One of those
You
policies
said same basic
that's coming.
work or?
no,
Doing-
I was in Christchurch, and now I'm the assertive community treatment team. I go out into homes and visit with folks, try to keep stable.
Is that a better match for you or?
Yeah, that's what I like doing. That's what I did
Oh,
for
well,
15 years pretty much. And I like being out. I don't like being stuck in a
Yeah, I hear that.
office.
I like being out too. I don't get going every which way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Forget this one. I'm going to dinner. I don't think it's up.
I'm breaking up. That means it's gonna be a long meeting, right?
You done went to the stash, haven't you?
The dunk is open.
We haven't hit this in a while. We haven't had
He's
executive
turning it.
session in a while.
Yeah,
What are you
that
hiding, man? You must be hiding something.
that's probably 2 years old.
That is-
Hey,
that
nothing
is on my
here,
bad list.
hey, nothing here at Edward's 2 years old, because Mitch is here.
Anything you can get.
Well,
2 days.
oh, did we lose you?
That way.
That was intentional.
Scratch, scratch,
Oh, sorry. You won't say it.
I've heard of it, but I
Brush Creek. Brush Creek, scratching over somewhere.
You know, in the fire department, first thing you do in the morning, if you were a rookie, you would look at all the calls in the last 24 hours. So you learn your area. I'm still doing that. I've been here 4 years, and I'm still doing it.
I know when, Smith County just put into their 911 system.
What about
I know when Smith County just put in their 911 system.
I haven't got anything recently. 12 minutes. What?
All right, I got y'all.
You there?
Well, I'm gonna tell you what,
But there is,
really good. Smith County, my cell phone doesn't work until Hallie already saw it, not one B. So they may be worse than we are.
On the southwest end they are. But I mean, it's supposed to be NRA, so. But yeah, there's that's where it's kind of rough.
All right. We got everybody back. We'll get moving. Next item is item number 2, approve the requested funds from the tax levy reserve fund to stabilize existing 911 system. So, open for discussion.
In light of the comment earlier, can we revise that to say ARPA funds so that we can get them obligated? Tax funds can sit there and just keep right on perking. They have no limitations on time. Might be better to take it out of the ARPA money.
Well, is that a decision you need from us, or is that something that
No,
administration, you can handle?
just give us the flexibility to make a call and then I'll inform the board at that point in time. Here's what we take the money from.
So then we just modify number 2 for the language right now, not trying to limit discussion, but right now what Tom said is just really approve requested funds to stabilize existing 911 system. And that way you can use whatever you have available, whatever makes sense. Is there any discussion about the stabilization option? I think is done with the recommendation. Mr. Chair?
I don't know of any greater need that affects every single person in this county and stabilizing our communication system. That's from the very oldest citizen in this county to the most newborn infant. It's ensuring that we get public safety there to take care of whatever the people's needs are. So, very, very much for it.
Okay. Any other discussion on that?
Yeah, I agree with Supervisor Hash. And the only question is, could it be less than 4 months, or is that just a projection, or what?
You give us the approval and these two guys are going around, they're gonna move. Cause money's sitting there,
Right.
so we don't have a delay.
We may not go complete all of it in 4 months, but we can certainly be moving.
Okay.
There's a lot of it we can do right away.
But a motion. That would be a motion for me.
Second.
We have a motion on the floor to approve requested funds to stabilize the existing 911 system. Is there a second? We already got a second. Any further discussion?
Shane, you have anything on that?
I have some questions. If the money is allocated to be spent, how are we deciding on what it's spent on?
I agree. I was gonna make a point too, it's worthwhile to consider establishing a working group to determine the priorities for purchase and make sure that we're all aligned, going in the same direction.
Well, we have a working group, sort of, kind of, the communication committee, but you may want to look at that from the administrator, see what you want, how you want to manage it.
I guess my question would be, do you guys wanna decide that? Or do you wanna let these two guys and this guy and the volunteers weigh in to do what needs to be done as soon as we can?
Whether it's microwaves or, repeaters or whatever needs to be there, I mean, y'all know the path forward. My technical knowledge of the radio equipment, they're the ones with it.
Well, we've been talking about doing something in the short term, near term to make things better. I think we're coalesced around, we know what needs to be done, you just need the resources to do it, so I kind of take it, go do it.
It's kind of highlighted in the proposal phase 2, correct? What you're putting the money towards?
It is, but the only addition I would say to that is, I wanna make sure these two guys are in sync on saying that this is exactly how it needs to be done. Cause I can't do that. And so I guess my question is, are y'all comfortable leaving it up to
Well, let me say-
administration?
I think.
And there'll be some debate, you're right, they're gonna have some different ideas and we'll ultimately have to decide, hey, we think this is the best thing for this initial phase. So I think Tom's point's right. Do you wanna have more input in this, or?
I think we will point 4 kind of cover that.
Point more?
Point 4 kind of review the existing 911 system proposal, and then if we pick a path on that proposal, that kind of says, okay, then if we're going this way, then that's what's going to need to be purchased. Does that answer that question?
That might have dropped, 4 might be more appropriate to deal with first,
Before the money?
before number 2.
What'd you say? I couldn't hear you.
The item 4 on the ask is actually gonna determine a lot of what the money's spent on in item 2. Is that,
Yeah, it makes sense. And Mr. Chair, if the board's okay, I'm okay with letting county administrator be the third leg in that wheel.
So we have a motion on the floor in a second, so to do number 2 with some modified language. Either we gotta cancel that motion or vote it down or rescind it, but gotta deal with that motion first. But right now, I think we're authorizing, we're being asked to authorize the funds.
Mr. Chair, can we amend that motion to include 4 as 2A and then number 2?
What would, so
So we're gonna review it before we approve it.
You can amend the motion after there's been a second.
Okay, if we need to go to point four, I'll rescind my motion and let us go ahead and discuss them before.
Right now, the way I've got it notes is that Mike made the motion to, use the money to stabilize the system. Ken a second. Steve was asked to look at forming a committee to prioritize the project needs.
It still works.
That's what I have in the notes at this point.
Say that again.
I said, Mike made the motion to use the money to stabilize the system. Ken seconded, and Steve was asked to look at forming a committee to prioritize his project needs.
Good.
So, I mean, we're gonna answer the question, we're gonna answer the path, stabilization path. We're gonna answer the, how we're gonna move forward when we answer number 4, so.
And then you can sequence it. Is that your point, Mike?
Yeah.
All right.
So I'll stick with my motion.
All right, so we have a motion and a second to authorize, approve the requested funds to stabilize the existing 911 systems. All in favor? Aye. Okay. All five. All right, moving on, number 3. The ask is to direct management to negotiate a service proposal with a national cell service vendor to construct towers in the west end of the county and draft a contract for services to be presented to the wireless authority. Any further clarification on this? I think for the purpose of the board, it might help to remind everybody that this is the PPEA, the result of PPEA authorization. So you mind just quick update how we got to this point, so that
With PPEA, which is set up by the state legislature to give counties the authority to use a different procurement process than the typical Virginia VPA, Virginia Procurement Agreement. And what it does is it allows you to contract with a vendor who can design, build, and operate technology solutions, school buildings, and tech centers that are associated with community colleges and universities. So literally, we could negotiate a contract with, let's say, US Sailor, because they put in an unsolicited proposal, which we could look at because of PPEA. That is what it's for. But they could tell us what it would cost to build the towers, operate the towers, and they can design and build and operate. And so the contract could be very comprehensive in terms of what we can do. And I will remind all of you, until you get towers, stabilizing our system is not going to be 100%. And so that's why we wanted to begin the process of at least getting on paper what is it going to cost, what's the timeline to do it. Because again, we need to know what that is to know when we can pay for it, how we're going to pay for it, and when we can do that. So it's really to get an agreement draft that we can bring back here for y'all.
so we have a proposal from US Cellular. Is that right?
We do.
Okay.
I think it's been, Tom, you speak to it more, like
They have updated it, and the last revision, frankly, what I asked for was what would be the additional cost to put a tower somewhere in the Comers Rock, Flat Ridge area? Because when I saw one of the propagation maps they gave us, if we had one there, it would blow out Creek wide open, and Comers Rock as well for cell service and potentially broadband wireless services. So they're kind of poking around on that right now, Mr. Chairman, and we should have something literally that can be looked at within a week to 10 days. But this calls for doing a draft contract too. Because it's one thing for them to say, yeah, we can do it. It's another thing to say, well, how are you going to do it? What's it going to cost? give me the details. And that's what we need to get authorization to do.
Any other, Ken, any?
Yeah, so if we're negotiating with them, are we trying to give them some incentive to put these towers? As you mentioned earlier, it wasn't business-wise, it wasn't beneficial. And would part of that negotiating be like if the school system has cell phones for staff? We have some here, probably sheriff's department, whatnot. Would that be part of that like if we, I mean, if you don't want to, if you're getting US Cellular to put towers or negotiate, and then we're using Verizon for other things. I'm just using that as an example. Would that be part of the, hey, we'll put our county stuff and we'll, get the sheriff's department on board and the school system. So we're utilizing that vendor.
That definitely could be part of it, but the biggest single issue is having the design of the tower meet every specification that these two guys put on the table for microwave and radio equipment. I mean, I'm kind of out on a limb here, but in one of the discussions, they talked about having enough distance between antennas so that you don't get overlap or whatever y'all call it. That means they got to design it around our specification. That's part of the negotiation. They have to do that if we're going to do business with them. So that when that tower goes up, these guys can start hanging stuff up and get our system up as rapidly as we can.
Under the, I think currently in our zoning ordinance, there's a paragraph in there about towers and that any new tower in the county was supposed to reserve a platform for county or county affiliated government or government affiliated association. I believe that we found out that the FCC said that's not, you can't do that.
Right.
So I think your point being that we need access to those towers in order to put county or government affiliated organizations on those towers. And so that's one of the things that you could negotiate. Is that right?
Right. And US Cellular currently has, Paul, don't they have 2 towers in the county?
2. Is it 2 or 3?
2 or 3. And part of our negotiation is to tell them, you got to make those towers ready for our 911 equipment too. So that's the kind of negotiating we're talking about.
We are on one of your towers now, in Freeze, right? Isn't that
Yes. Well, we're actually on the one up here. Well, it's not as well, but it's owned by American Tower.
Who else has towers in our county?
So can you explain that again? You said the FCC said we can't do that.
That's exactly right.
But we can.
We can do it under contract, we just can't require them to do it.
You can't have an ordinance that requires.
Require.
Exactly.
You missed the verb.
I did.
I mean, another negotiation point, which I picked up from Shane, is when they build a tower, they need to have an air conditioned room big enough to accommodate all of our equipment in addition to theirs. I mean, like,
Separate closure.
oh yeah, so that, and so that's just part of the design requirement that we would place on them, and that you negotiate that. Those are the kind of issues we want to work through.
If we can, doesn't mean we don't attack that issue that you just talked about, and we'll try to include that as well. I mean, you could just say, if there's I don't know how many county phones there are 50 phones, 2,000 a month. You may say $30,000 a year. I don't know. But it's a negotiation, so.
Any other discussion? All right, so with that, take a motion for number 3.
So moved.
The motion, is there a second?
Second.
Second from Mr. Anderson. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. 5. Okay, moving on to number 4. Number 4 ask is review the existing 911 system proposal and make final decisions regarding the system, prepare cost estimates, and present information along with a timeline for implementation for wireless authority review and approval. So we've got, this is kind of, in my mind, I think what you're saying is we've got the stabilization action. Now we need to look at, okay, life beyond stabilization.
Right. Exactly.
Discussion. Michael, what's your?
Well,
First bite.
I think we got the two gentlemen in here in the room to kind of know what the initial proposal is and some of the costs associated with that, and then discussions that we've had with. I know from our joint meeting, each locality was supposed to go back and kind of figure out their path forward. Galax, they're not a player. So, in Carroll County,
Carroll's on their own, their stabilization.
stabilization, so I don't know that there's, I think it's pretty well, we're gonna have to forge our path forward ourselves. I mean, I don't know how do we, if we don't play with Galax, I mean, they're pretty well got there's, of course, they're not covered in as much a geographic area. They're kind of in that bowl with what they have, so, and they pretty well have, took the measures they need. If Carroll County's not a player, it's kind of a moot point, I believe, unless either one of y'all would have something to add to that.
To me, the most important thing that in this whole outline is the timeline. We don't have time to waste, and there are certain milestones that we need to be able to achieve, and it's going to require your authorization and your involvement in that, funding being a big one. And to me, that's the piece we need to present to you guys to say, here's the 24-month period, and here are the things that we got to do. Are y'all prepared to let us run and get it done? And that to me, Mike, is the one thing that when I look at the overall proposal, we need a defined timeline for our county in making this happen.
So it says existing proposal. The existing proposal, is that the
Talking about the Kenwood proposal.
Johnson
Yeah.
or Kenwood?
The one we have from Julia.
I understand.
So with the action of the other localities, I mean, that's pretty much out the window, right?
As a joint
Right.
project, yeah.
That's just the,
I don't see that
what
we can,
they've got, I can't endorse personally, especially given the other moves that have been made since then. I personally feel we can stay on path to still be able to communicate with our neighbors without reinventing the wheel here, and we can do it in a timely fashion. Now we are staring down the barrel of December, January, February on some of these mountaintops. That'll obviously slow us down on that side of things, but ordering things is also the other hurdle right now. We pull the trigger today, we may be looking at 4 to 6 months for deliveries from some of this equipment. And that's just a supply chain issue that's held over from COVID that we have zero control over. But we can get ourselves in a better position in months and not years.
I think my biggest concern about is that we're not buying equipment that's going to be out of date, or we're going to buy it and it's going to have a reduced effectiveness date because it sat in a box because we weren't ready to put it on a tower or pole or whatever the resource is. So the PERT diagram of, we got to do this first before we do this sort of thing is really important as part of the timeline, because it just doesn't make sense to buy something if we're not ready to put it into operation to maximize its effectiveness. I'd rather somebody else hold on to that inventory than for us to hold on to that inventory and then sit there.
My solution to that is address what we have currently, the things that we can handle.
That's the stabilization piece, right?
Yes. There are some other factors that play into the addition of new towers or the replacement of some towers that we'll add equipment to and add coverage. But those are things that we can defer till that time is right and spend that money then. Whereas we could move on what we have now and affect change.
So, if I may, what we're really looking at, if we're not gonna adopt the project as presented by a vendor, is that we need to create a strategic plan for where we're going and how we're doing. And I would suggest that the working group that we already talked about can work on that, present options to the authority, and then have the authority sign off and say, okay, this is our path forward, and everything you do from this point on will support that plan, or then everybody's in the loop for any modifications to the plan down the road. But we really don't have, we're talking about ordering equipment, which is great. We definitely need a bunch of new equipment, but we don't have the plan on why are we replacing equipment? What does it do for the long-term accountability of the 911 system? That's kind of where I want to make sure that we don't fall behind. I don't want to just keep replacing widgets because we don't address the system. I want to address it systemically.
You know, it's kind of like, last time I built a house, a contractor gave me the contract price and gave me this list of all this stuff he had to buy. But until I saw his work plan, it said when the foundation's going in, when does the subfloor go in, when's it gonna be dried in, when is the air conditioner showing up. I didn't know how much money I was gonna spend and when I was gonna spend it. And to me, when I read the proposal, and I'm not a technical guy, there's a lot of purchasing going on. But that plan does not give you a timeline that tells me, from a project management perspective, that you start here with this, and then this, and then this, and then that. And that, to me, is what we're talking about trying to do, is look at that and see, with the experts we have on board, what is the right staging and the elements. Because there's some questions in that proposal that weren't answered about technology. And those have got to be answered. And that's, I think, what I was trying to get at with number 4 is we need to get our heads down and dig in deep and come up with a plan that you guys can count on.
We never came out of that, and Shane, you agree, we never came out with a perfect alignment. It's like we all agreed this is the way to go. Even within the jurisdictions, we had leanings in different directions. So I think that we put our heads together until we do have that perfect alignment so that we don't, honestly, any friction we have should be with costing, not with engineering.
Mr. Chairman, got a question. So at the end of the day, with Carol doing their thing, Galax is okay, us doing our thing, when the 911 commission meets, I guess I'm talking to y'all on that, they're gonna be okay with the plan that and communications between us and Carol and Galax will be able to go forward and be advanced with our current.
We just make that one of the
What we're planning to do. We'll be able to communicate among each other.
one of the foundations of the plan would be we have to have interoperable communication with our neighbors.
But everybody going off on a tangent and doing their thing, that is gonna happen, correct?
That's like a coalition of the willing you're talking about there. They still don't have any decision making abilities.
Yeah.
But I know at one time, so in history, we've had a problem with what I was just talking about. And I hate this, I think we've come closer not to having that problem. As we go this route again, is that gonna be a problem again?
One of the advantages we have with Shane as part of this is that he represents the entire region, so he knows what everybody else is doing. And if we run into an area where we're coming up with a solution that is not gonna work with Galax, or it's not gonna work with Carol, we know early on that process, so we can start dealing
He's the
with it.
common denominator that can say, whoa, if you do that.
Then there's no connectivity.
And I think the key word to remember here is stabilization. We can talk to our neighbors today, we're going to be able to talk to our neighbors tomorrow. Nobody is changing the band. As my advice would be, as long as we don't introduce a new technology on top of that band, we're safe. If we start introducing anything else on top of that, we're gonna have further discussions.
That's what I was wanting to know.
Well, that's sort of the question I was asking, so in our,
Hey, I got picked up,
We have a great phone system here, don't worry.
It's part of that grant money we're going after. Go ahead, Ken.
But that revolved around the question I had, is in our last meeting, that I took it that it was all or none. And we was with Galax and Carroll, and it was all or none, and the vendor, is that price gonna change because it's us and not them?
Well, I don't think we're wedded to that vendor now.
No, we're not waiting yet, no. He's right. We can go after any vendor we want. I'm always careful, at least in my past, and this is not my forte, but these vendors are like drug dealers, right? I mean, I don't mean in a bad way, right? They want to get you hooked on a certain system, and once you're hooked on that system, you gotta be careful. Now, tell me if I'm wrong about this.
No.
Well, that's what I took out of that last meeting, and you had a good point, and it was just like, no, this is where we're going, and it was all or none, and that's why I got confused on it.
One of the things that we've learned through this process, or at least that I've learned, is it's almost never all or none. It's almost always, there's always a mechanism. It's just, but there are points, decision points in the engineering tree where once you make them, you're committed down a technology path. Am I saying that right, Shane?
Yeah.
For instance, if, at some point in the future, if we go to digital, and I would hope that somewhere in the future we will, and that'd be a long-term thing, but that's definitely a decision point. So everything you do after that, you have to really figure out how they're gonna play back and reverse engineer to interoperability with our neighbors and other technologies, so.
Yeah.
But I think if we rely on the expertise, Shane and some other folks we can put in the working group, and we can kind of solve those before we throw them at y'all for a final decision.
Can I ask another question about this working group, just so I'm clear? Does the board want this to be, you want to assign members, or is the idea that I get together a small group and we get after this?
Your second one is what I was.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
That's what I'm sure.
Yeah, I think,
Clear what you want.
I think, there's been there's been the study, from federal, targeting the issues. I mean, all that's been done. You've got that to look at, and all the agencies are aware of their shortcomings and their problems.
Yeah.
And so Shane's aware of that. I think you've got it to a point now where Paul and Shane, they both know that information, probably frontwards and backwards. And I think it's down to the point where y'all can fine tune it and pick what we need.
I'm certainly a big fan of having visuals and timelines and going, okay, here's our decision-making points on these things. So you all can be informed of where we're headed as well. So,
Hey, Brantley, you got any comments, questions?
Knows that you being the man.
I'm good, thanks.
I think my overarching, very high-level comment is interoperability is the big one we hit on, but redundancy is the other.
Yes.
Right, because I've used digital communications most of my life, and it sucks. Hard to make happen. Great when it works, but there's always the fallback. And we need multiple layers of communication so that we don't have single point failure.
shit, we need one layer.
Yeah.
No, I get it, but I've got it. It's a phase thing, but we don't want to your point about path, we gotta have multiple paths to the same objective.
Fair enough.
The other part of it is from an infrastructure standpoint, the Point Lookout is a tower which is in the center of the county, great location for one tower. But as we look at infrastructure needs, and we're in discussion with US Cellular, last time I talked with one of those executives, they were looking at maybe ringing Grayson County versus a central location. The reason being is because then they could transmit into other counties, right? There's issues with that Point Lookout tower, legal issues, access issues, et cetera. So if we look at, it's just a caution, I guess, that current infrastructure that we have doesn't mean that we have to use it going forward. When we look at what our needs are. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Because we may be able to solve some other issues by just putting infrastructure in different places. All right. Yeah.
So I've got the full plate for our current administration to figure out the problem and fix it.
So you want to be on the committee, is that what you said?
Absolutely, I just want 10 meetings.
All right, so any further discussion? If not, number 4, we're good with that language. So take that in form of motion. So we have a motion and a motion. All right. Hash, Ivy motion, Hash second. There, Mitch. Got it. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Okay. Other items, Mr. Administrator.
Have any other items?
Okay, having no other items, I'll take a motion to adjourn. So moved. Is there a second? All in favor, say aye. Thanks, Brandon. Safe travels.
I'm sorry, what did you say? That last motion? No, Ivy made the motion.
To adjourn.
Oh, yeah,
This is it, man.
Just real quick on this, I just said, I don't know if you were in here,